One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. Hi there, my name is Alex Mason and I am your host. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about an accounting concept related to the balance sheet called negative shareholders' equity. And the question is, can you have negative shareholders' equity? Well, let's go ahead and go to the whiteboard right now and I'll show you exactly how to think about this from the perspective of breaking down the balance sheet and also looking at it in context of the other financial statements. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so as far as the balance sheet goes, we know that we have assets, we have liabilities, and then we have the equity section. And remember always the basic fundamental equation of accounting: assets equals liabilities plus equity. This is always going to be true. So if we think about the concept of equity, how do we get negative equity? Well, it's kind of like if you or I bought a house. If we bought it for, let's say, $200,000 and we financed it completely with a mortgage, and then next year, the property value shrank to just $100,000, we would be underwater, which means we have a negative equity situation. That's kind of how it works for businesses too. So a company might have, $100 in equity, maybe they have $200 in liabilities, and they have negative $100 in shareholders' equity. Now, of course, this is just simple math. It's not hard to understand, but I want to teach you now how this connects to the other financial statements. So remember how on the income statement, the end of the income statement, we have revenue, we have a bunch of costs, and then they filter all the way down to net income or profit. Now, this net income flows into something called retained earnings. Retained earnings. And retained earnings is a part of shareholders' equity. So you can imagine what would happen if a company did not turn a profit and instead it recorded a loss for the period. So if it lost money, that would flow over to your retained earnings and take away from your equity. So let's say that you have a business that's successful, it's profitable, it has positive equity, and then it goes through a string of years where it's just loss after loss after loss. Well, that retained earnings number is going to go down and down and down, and ultimately that could turn your overall equity value of the company negative. Now, this is, of course, a common situation when a company is in trouble financially, but a company doesn't necessarily have to be in trouble for you to have negative shareholders' equity. It could also kind of be part of the company's business model. So let me show you part of what I mean here. So one common type of transaction that you might see as an investment banker is something called a leverage buyout. And we're going to talk a lot more about leverage buyouts in future episodes, but fundamentally it's when a firm comes in and buys another firm, primarily using leverage, and using that leverage amplifies the returns that they gain on that business. So in the LBO, that's the abbreviation for leveraged buyout, balance sheet, you might have an interesting situation. So here's your assets, here's your liabilities, and then you have your equity. So in the LBO, the company itself has certain assets and liabilities. But when the company has a ton of debt put on its balance sheet in order to make the transaction happen, your liabilities are going to go up, and they're usually going to go way up. So if your amount of assets stays the same, then that means your equity could significantly go down. And actually, your assets will probably go down a little bit too, just because some cash may be taken out of the deal, depending on what's going on. There's one thing that some private equity firms do in a leveraged buyout called the dividend recapitalization. Go ahead and write that here, dividend recapitalization. And basically what that means is these firms want to get some money out of the company as soon as they buy it. So they don't have to necessarily wait for years and years before they sell the business at a higher price and turn a profit. They can return some of that cash to shareholders right now using the cash that's actually on the balance sheet of the business. They're literally just taking some money out of the business after they acquire ownership of it. So when you have this situation, the cash is coming out of the business, liabilities went up because usually there's a lot of leverage in these situations. And so you can see with assets going down, liabilities going up, equity goes down, and sometimes can go down significantly in a leveraged buyout situation, particularly with a dividend recapitalization. And that can be a very normal thing. Over time, the business will pay off its debt using its cash flows. The equity will then rise again, and then everything will be okay. It's not necessarily an indicator that the business is struggling. So that's one scenario you can think about when thinking about this concept of negative shareholders' equity. There's also other situations where shareholders' equity can be negative and the business is doing okay, just based on the business model and the amount of leverage that's used or the liabilities in order to make the business successful. So it's not always a bad thing, but it definitely can be a bad thing. So keep that in mind. That's what we got for you today here on Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason. I'm your host. Thank you so much for following, subscribing, liking this show and this episode. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one. All right, take care.